Today I will talk on Paul Ricœur's life as thoroughly as I know it. Paul Ricœur was born on the 27th of February 1913, 27 February 1913, and passed on to eternal life on May 20, 2005. He was born in Valence, southeastern France, and Valence is spelled capital Valence, and his father was named Léon Ricœur, and his mother was Florentine Favre, and he came from a family of what is called the Huguenots. They were French Protestants, and Léon served as a sergeant in the 75th Infantry Regiment of the French Army during World War I, and went missing at the beginning of the Second Battle of Champagne from the 25 September 1915 up to 6 November 1915. And on the 26th of September 1915, the French military authorities declared that Jules, his father, Paul Ricœur's father, Léon Jules Ricœur, had probably been killed in the Battle of Champagne. And his body was not found until 1932, when a field was being plowed by a farmer, and the body was identified by his military tags. Paul's father occurred when he was just 2 years old, and his mother died a few months after his birth. He was 7 months old, and so Paul Ricœur was raised by his grandparents in a city called Rennes, capital Rennes, in France. And his paternal grandparents passed away, and his father's sister, Adèle Ricœur, raised Ricœur, Paul Ricœur. Paul Ricœur received as a war orphan a small stipend from the French government. And while attending the Lyceum of Rennes, where he studied under Roland Dalbier, his philosophy professor at the Lyceum of Rennes. And Paul Ricœur received his bachelor's degree in philosophy at 19 years old from the University of Rennes in 1932, and began studying phenomenology at the Sorbonne in 1933 to 1934. During this time, he was influenced by the philosopher Gabriel Marcel. And Gabriel Marcel was a dramatist. He was never a professor at the university, so his influence occurred when Gabriel Marcel organized Friday meetings at his apartment. And in 1934, he completed a diploma of higher studies, roughly equivalent to a Master of Arts degree, with a NMA thesis, The Problem of God in Jules Lachelier and Jules Lagneau. And in 1935, Ricœur was awarded the second highest aggregation grade in the nation for philosophy, presaging a bright future. On August 14, 1935, Paul Ricœur, at 22 years old, married his wife Simone, Simone Lejas, with whom he had 5 children, 4 sons and a daughter. And the marriage lasted 67 years. In 1936 to 1937, Paul Ricœur fulfilled his military service. And then World War II interrupted Ricœur's career, and he was drafted to serve in the French army in 1939. His unit was captured during the German invasion of France in 1940, and he spent the next 5 years as a prisoner of war. His detention camp was filled up with many intellectuals, among them Michel Dufresne, with whom he wrote a book on Paul Ricœur. And these intellectuals organized classes sufficiently rigorous that the camp was accredited as a degree-granting institution by the Vichy government. And during that time, Paul Ricœur read Karl Jaspers. It's amazing that in a German prison camp, you read a book of the enemy, and he also began a translation of Edmund Husserl's Ideas 1. Ricœur taught at the University of Strasbourg from 1948 to 1956, the only French university with a Protestant faculty of theology. In 1950, he received his state doctorate, submitting as a minor thesis his translation of Husserl's Ideas 1 and a major thesis being the first volume of the Philosophy of the Will, Freedom and Nature, the Voluntary and the Involuntary. Ricœur then acquired a reputation as an expert on phenomenology, then the rising philosophy in France. In 1956, Ricœur took up a position at the Sorbonne in Paris as the chair of general philosophy, and this appointment signaled Ricœur's emergence as one of France's eminent philosophers. While at the Sorbonne, he wrote 3 works that cemented his reputation, the 2 volumes of the Philosophy of the Will, which were Fallible Man and the Symbolics of Evil, translated into English as The Symbolism of Evil. And in 1965, he wrote a book on Freud, and the French title of the book is De l'interprétation, Essay sur Freud, but it was translated into French as Freud and Philosophy. And during this time, in the early 60s, Jacques Derrida was his assistant. From 1965 to 1970, Ricœur was the dean at the newly founded University of Nanterre in suburban Paris. And Nanterre was intended as an experiment in progressive education, and Ricœur hoped that he could create a university in accordance with his vision, free of the stifling air of the tradition-bound Sorbonne and its overcrowded classes. However, Nanterre became a hotbed of protest during the Student Revolution of May 1968 in France. Ricœur was derided as an old clown, in quotation marks. Disenchanted with French academic life, Ricœur taught briefly at the French-speaking Université Catholique de Louvain in Belgium before taking a position at the Divinity School of the University of Chicago, where he taught from 1970 to 1985. His study culminated in La Métaphore Vive, which was to be translated as the living metaphor, but had as English title The Rule of Metaphor, semicolon, multidisciplinary studies of the creation of meaning in language, published in 1975, followed by the 3-volume Time and Narrative, which were published in 1983, 1984, 1985. Ricœur then gave what is called the Gifford Lectures at the University of Edinburgh in 1985 to 1986. Published as Soi-même comme un autre in 1990 and published in English as Oneself as Another in 1992, this work built on his discussion of narrative identity and his continuing interest in the self. Time and Narrative secured Ricœur's return to France in 1985 as a notable intellectual. His late work was characterized by a continuing cross-cutting of national intellectual traditions. For example, some of his latest writings engage the thought of the American political philosopher John Rawls. And on 7th January 1998, His wife, Simone, passes on after 63 years of marriage. In 1999, Paul Ricœur was awarded the Balzan Prize, capital BALZAN, for philosophy, cited for, and I quote the citation, his capacity in bringing together all the most important themes of 20th century philosophy and re-elaborating them into an original synthesis which turns language, in particular that which is poetic and metaphoric, into a chosen place, revealing a reality that we cannot manipulate but interpret only in the different ways and yet all coherent. Through the use of metaphor, language draws upon the truth which makes of us that what we are deep in the profundity of our own essence. End of quotation. In 2000, Paul Ricœur received the Japanese prize, the Kyoto Prize, for Pensée et Éthique, Thought, Philosophy and Ethics, and on 29 November 2004, he was awarded with the second John W. Kluge Prize for Lifetime Achievement in the Human Sciences. Ricœur passed on to eternal life on May 20, 2005, age 92, at his home in Châtenay-Malabry, France, of natural causes. At that time, French Prime Minister Jean-Pierre Raffarin declared that, and I quote Minister Raffarin, "The humanist European tradition is in mourning for one of its most talented exponents."